All right, so hello everybody. This is Saturday afternoon in Thailand, about 4 o'clock, and Michael is in Thailand. In fact, he's right here on the porch. And Freddie, you're in England, right? And Anna, you're still in India.
I'm in Berlin now.
You're back in London, okay? And Amrit was just in India not long ago, and he's back. So, welcome everybody. We've got a topic today that comes under the heading of thoroughness. And in fact, I've been talking to several students about that because uh, we, in our culture, in fact, the language that we use in our culture often has to do with that we don't say things specifically, that we in fact use words and we don't even bother to define them. And we assume that other people use the same definitions of the words that we're using. This causes almost all arguments. Very rarely do people actually disagree once they understand what the other one is saying. And often the problem is not that we don't understand what the other person is saying. What it is, generally, the problem is we do not ourselves even understand what we are saying. That Michael and I have talked about this the other day in the sense of that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was very thorough, very specific, using language, often defining language, giving terms to concepts. An example of that is the difference between ordinary language or balloon language. He used the word balloon as opposed to knife language or Dhamma language. Okay. And what is the difference between a balloon and a knife? Well, a knife is used for cutting, and we need to be careful with it to be sure that we're cutting specifically, to where balloons are normally a play toy that often will explode, sometimes right in our face. And that we are trained in balloon language, in ordinary language, and we often don't even know the concept of Dhamma language, which would be like cutting things up or diagnosing them, giving specific definitions of words. Very sloppy is what we normally are. For instance, a clear example of that would be saying you when we actually mean me. Now, what do I mean by that? All right, it's when Kat was asking a question about ordination, and he says, "Well, when you ordain, blah blah blah," and I says, "Wait a minute, Kat, I have no intention of ordaining. It's not that I'm ordaining; it's you are ordaining." And maybe the way to say it is one who ordains, to take it out of the I's, the me's, the my's, the you's, and put it into general context because in the sense of the ordination process, it's more or less the same for everyone. And so we can start to listen to the language we use. But in fact, the most important thing that I can say about it is that we talk to each other and we're not even listening to what we say. How in the world can we learn to understand what we're thinking if we're not even listening to what we're actually saying with the mouth? Because the mind is a forerunner and it is generally more subtle than language itself, and we're not even listening to the language that we use. And so, this is the whole point about the balloon language, which is airy fairy, fill of air, moves around, nothing specific, and it often explodes right in our face. And we need then to start defining the language that we're using. A clear example of that would be some of the Pali words that you guys have picked up. And the example that I would use, in fact, is not even a Pali word, but it's an English word, but everybody has a different meaning for it. Like, for instance, the word enlightenment. Most people have an airy-fairy way up there. Nobody knows quite what it is, but it must be wonderful, and I really want it. So we begin to want something that we don't have, and guess what? We don't even know what it is. And so it's very particular that we begin to define it. So I'll, just as an example, I'll give some people a chance. Michael, I'll give you a shot at it. Define the word enlightenment. You, I think, have heard what I have defined it as, so you can go ahead.
To just chill, lighten up.
All right, to just chill, just lighten up. How about you, Freddie? Give me a definition of the word enlightenment.
I don't know.
That's honest. All right, Amrit, give me
Yeah.
give me a definition of the word enlightenment.
I will give the definition, but this definition actually I got from you.
Yes, okay, so you've heard it before.
Definition,
Right.
there are two parts to enlightenment. So one is the lighten up,
Mm-hmm.
and the another one is lighten up in a sense you are carrying a load and now you are putting the load down.
Right. The word enlightenment I use in the sense of what comes out of the suttas as knowledge and deliverance. There's two different qualities to it, knowledge and deliverance. And so in the word enlightenment, we have the definition of the word light in the sense of lighten up, turn on the lights, shine a light on it, bring the torch out. And we use the word light here as actually a way of looking or observing. And when we can see it, especially if we can see it clearly and know what it is, then that would be the part of the enlightenment, which is really true knowledge because of observation. And what are we actually observing is that which defines us as being burdened, being in prison, being in jail, being strapped with a ball and chain, having defilements, having hindrances, having dukkha. And we can now, when we're looking, we can see it. And when we see it, what are we going to do, Michael? Are we going to change it? Are we going to drop it? Are we going to relinquish it, that which is heavy?
Get rid of it.
Right. And by that definition, then, of the word lighten, it has to do with not heavy, to drop it, to set it down. And then we are light. So this is a point. And let's use an example of another word, perhaps even more difficult to define. All right. So, Freddie, I'll give you a second chance. Define the word God. Wow.
I don't know. Yahweh.
Well, Yahweh is the name.
Jehovah.
Okay, Jehovah is a bad translation of the name Yahweh. And then you have Elah or Allah. And then you have Zeus, Neptune, Thor. Actually, it's not Thor. He's the son of Woden. So there's a lot of different names for God. And in fact, by naming the God's name, we actually give a slight leaning towards a definition. But if the word God is so general, people can't even define it. In fact, I have actually seen Christians in church having an argument over the definition of the word God because everybody's got their own definition of it. And then we see atheists and Christians getting into discussions that are actually arguments, but they call them discussions or debates because they've got rules. But the point is that they never actually define God when they actually debate, does God exist? Well, what is it that exists or not? That in fact you can define the word God, then you can determine whether it exists or not. And if you define it in a magical sense, the way that many Christians define it, like a sky daddy or a Zeus that's sitting on a throne in a Valhalla or a heaven or something like that. And then the other kind of definition of God would be all-encompassing, universal, environmental. The way that Jesus would describe God has nothing to do with the way that Christians define God, because Christians have a really magical idea of it. And because it's magical, it's airy-fairy and easy for people to argue with each other over it. And normally then the word God, as like enlightenment, is defined in an airy-fairy, mushy kind of way. This is why the Bhikkhu Buddhadasa called it balloon language. And it explodes in our face often because we're not careful with the definition of the words. And that we want to start talking in a kind of way that slices and dices and cuts into things so that we can see things clearly. A conversation that I had just recently, in fact, it was this morning with Cathal, that he's at a Wat in Udon Thani now, and he was saying that he was actually criticized by some of the monks because he is, let us say, airy-fairy, wishy-washy, not specific. And one example would be, well, what happens when you ordain? Well, I'm not going to ordain. Why would he say you? When in fact it's he that wants to ordain. And so we need to start listening to the kind of language that we use, because that's actually, and that's the point of this talk, it's actually quite possible that we do not even listen to what we're saying. So how can we then start listening to what we're thinking? Because often our thoughts are mistaken. We think that we're having wholesome thoughts, where in fact they are actually unwholesome. And then we wind up with non-specific language that actually winds up being unwholesome instead of being wholesome. So we need to start listening to the language that we use. We can call this practice. Now, we also have the definition of a word meditation. Let's get a definition, okay? Anna, give me a definition of the word meditation. We'll give her a chance later. Amit, give me the definition of the word meditation.
I would define it as either wholesome thinking or no thinking. This would be my definition for meditation.
Right, okay. But that's not a common definition. You probably got that definition by listening to the kind of things that I've said. Freddie, give me a definition of the word meditation.
Maybe a common definition would be to sit down and stop thinking. Maybe some people think that's what meditation is.
All right. Let me try your name again. Toya. Is that close enough? Toyan.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, Dhammarato.
All right.
Yeah,
You give me a definition of the word meditation.
I feel I feel like you're looking for the most typical definition of meditation, like kind of focus, concentration on a object of your choosing, whether
All
it's
right.
breath.
Well, let's start then with what was the original meditation. When the Catholic priest or the monks would go to their monastery and meditate, what were they actually doing? The answer would be that meditation in the original use of the word was much more like contemplation or mulling something over. It was not used in the sense of an examination, because what they were examining, if they could examine it, was something that was already just in their mind. An example of that would be a meditation on mercy, or what is the Trinity, or what was to be the compassion of Mother Mary. These are the kind of things that, in fact, in some cases, there are documents or writings, maybe poem-like, that would be called a meditation, where they're discussing something, a topic. Now, Freddie gave the idea that meditation has to do with a particular posture. And often the monks, when they were meditating, they would be on their knees. So when they Westerners bring in the word meditation, they often then will look at posture in the sense of, well, the Asians sit in a particular kind of posture that's cross-legged. Therefore, a cross-legged posture has something to do with meditation. And because of this, let us say, vast variety of definitions, you could put the word meditation back in the language of the balloon. Ordinary, hairy-fairy, nobody knows quite what they're talking about. And we all have specific ideas. And so when they contact me, one of the things that I'll say is that I'm not a meditation teacher. I don't teach meditation, not the way that it is used. That, in fact, let's have another word, and I'll start off with this word by saying, I'm not Buddhist. So, Michael, define Buddhist. What is the word Buddhist? How about Buddhism? What is that?
Generally speaking, someone that believes in rebirth, reincarnation, all sorts of different devas, ghosts, and believes it's good to light incense at the Buddha statues.
Mm-hmm. All right. So this would be an airy-fairy, ordinary balloon language kind of definition. And that's the way that most people would see it. So a Buddhist is someone like, in fact, they call Thailand a Buddhist country. That's one of the reasons why I would not claim to be Buddhist, because of the definition of the word. In fact, the word is so commonly used with such different definitions, it's become airy-fairy, balloon-like, not very specific. And so I would claim I'm not a Buddhist. Here's another example. How about the word Christianity or Christian? That's also an airy-fairy balloon language, blows up in people's faces all the time. But a much clearer definition would be going for the actual teachings of Jesus, what he taught, not who he is. Christianity is based upon many different belief systems about who Jesus was. Did he actually live? Was he actually nailed to the cross? Was he actually a virgin birth? And all of that kind of stuff is airy-fairy, but the more important point is that it's irrelevant. just like the word Buddhism is irrelevant. That what we can start then with Dhamma language is we're talking about specifically what the Buddha said, what the Buddha actually taught. And with Christianity, we can go to exactly what Jesus actually said. Now, the thing of it is that it's a whole lot easier thanks to a whole lot of very specific thinking and talking and using Dhamma language that we actually have a better chance of understanding what the Buddha actually said, because a lot of what Jesus says winds up being airy-fairy balloon language. And we're not quite sure what Jesus said. And so the whole point then of this talk or this conversation would be to let's start looking at the words we're using and how we define them and what they mean in the relationship of what other people around us mean when we're using this kind of language. That we don't say you when they mean me, or a better way to talk about it is to say one or someone or anybody. We also use superlatives quite often in our language, like it's always the case. Well, whatever it is, it's not always. Everything keeps changing. So you could say sometimes or most of the time, but when we use the words always, like, well, that's what you always do. Well, you don't always do that. Sometimes you're doing something else. Another way of looking at that kind of language is that often we use words to try to express how we feel rather than actually say what we feel. Here's an example of that. I just tried to start the truck and it won't start. And I come storming into the house and slam the keys down and I say, that damn truck. Well, the word damn there is actually pointing out how I feel rather than actually expressing exactly how it is that I feel. I don't like that the truck doesn't start. And so we use language to define how we feel using superlatives, using low language, using all kinds of stuff, rather than actually expressing ourselves according to what's actually going on inside the mind. And so this is the kind of thing that we need to start watching for. And in that case, we can do that when we're talking to somebody. Listen to what you're saying when you're talking to someone, and then we can call that meditation. Why? Because you're paying attention. Because that's what real meditation is, in the sense of the way that we want to use the word, not that we're contemplating something or that we're trying to figure it out, or that another word that they use is noting. They call noting meditation. All right. But noting means that you see it, but you're not actually discriminating. You're not seeing the difference between knife language and balloon language. We're not seeing the difference between is this thought wholesome or not wholesome. And so this is actually something that I invite you to do, is start meditating more often, in the sense of start listening to the language that you use. Be very specific about the language that you use. That in fact, Daniel was once asking me about low-class language, and I says, yes, I use low-class language. Why? Because low-class language often gets the point across. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa used low-class language also. That in fact, one of the ones that just came up recently is that one of the dogs that hung around Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, he named the dog Luang Po. Now in Thailand, that's a big no-no. That would be a really low-class way of using the word Luang Po, because Luang Po actually means a monk that's of such high status. And the word Long Po actually means great uncle. And yet when you call a dog Long Po, in fact, we use the word dog when we're actually trying to use low-class language, which in fact we're talking about opinion. When you call somebody a dog, you're actually saying that you have a very low opinion of them. But instead of talking about it in the sense of I have a low opinion of this guy, we just make a name up and call him a dog. Sometimes we will call him a specific kind of dog, like a son of a bitch. And I use the word son of a bitch as an example here because where I was raised, a bitch is a female dog, which means that the son of a bitch is nothing but a puppy. And I love puppies. And so when you call me a son of a bitch, I say, why? Because I use a different definition of the term son of a bitch. So begin to understand that people use the words differently and that you have an obligation to start being more clear, more specific, more exact about what you're actually thinking and feeling. Because if you can do that when you're using language out loud and kind of in a gross way, then you could begin to see that when you're alone, practicing anapanasati, practicing meditation, is when you're actually looking at the language that you're using. You're actually hearing the language that you use and know that you can make a change to that. That in fact, that's one of the things that I do on interviews with people quite often is I listen to the language that you're using and then call them on it. And in fact, the kind of interviews that I do with people is often pointed, even confrontational. Why? Because I'm repeating back to them the words that they're using, and they're using those words in a sloppy way rather than in a precise way. And so I'll repeat it back to them to get them to start to think more precisely. So many times students will call, and I don't know why they call. I would assume that when people call, it's because they want to hear the Dhamma, they want to hear how to practice, and oftentimes they'll wind up calling and start comparing me to other teachers, start talking about strong determination sittings, sitting cross-legged, noting all kinds of things that they practice instead of listening to what we really need to do. And basically, that word would come down to, and this is a knife word that I'm about to use, it's called change. We have to start to change. We have to start listening to the language that we're using, the balloon mental language that we use, and start changing it into specific knife language. When we do that, we can then begin to hear that the language that we're using, this airy-fairy balloon language, we can't see the dukkha in it. But when we nail it down with specific language, the knife language of being precise, that's when we can see the dukkha in it. And then we can change. So this is an important point. I'm really glad that you brought this up, Michael, is we have to learn to be specific. We have to learn to listen to what we say, because then if we start listening to what we're saying to other people, that'll give us a handle on beginning to listen to what we're thinking. And so we begin to get much more specific, get much more clear, get precise about what's going on. That in fact, as I said before, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was not just known for using low-class language intentionally, but he also used language to be very precise, and he often, a whole talk in fact, would be on giving the definition of a word. That in fact, one of the talks that he gave is under the name of Hunger and happiness. And he talks a lot about what is hunger. That in fact, what we need to do is to stop going through the cycle. By the way, the balloon language would be being hungry, knowing that we're hungry, wanting to get filled so that we don't feel hungry anymore. And so we're in that cycle of, I want it, I got to get it, and I'm satisfied when I do get it, just like eating a meal. My tummy is hungry. It growls, it talks, it gives unpleasant sensations. And then I eat, and then I'm full, and now I don't want to eat anymore. I'm not hungry. But then I'll get hungry again. And so we're that way, not just with food, we're that way with all kinds of things, mostly mental, to where we want something, like I want the answer to a question. I look on Google and I get an answer to the question and I'm satisfied. But then that raises another question. Now I'm hungry again, and so I'll do another Google research and I'll get an answer, and then I'm satisfied. But there seems to be no end to it. We keep having questions and answers and questions and answers and questions and answers. Here's the point.
Just like to say that I'm very guilty of this particular kind of hunger. Very, very, very much so. It's an issue for sure. In the sense of I'm trying to be aware and changing it every time. But often I just don't even realize, because that's how much of an issue it is.
Mm-hmm. We get into the habit of wanting to have information and then getting the information, which only raises a question about some new information. And we never come around to the point about, let's stop being hungry.
Indeed.
Let's stop being hungry. Hungry for information, hungry for food, hungry for this and that. Let's stop being hungry and start being satisfied. And so we have to define these words about being hungry in the sense of wanting something that we don't have. And you've heard me use that expression often, wanting something that we don't have, because that's in the suttas under the definition of the word dukkha, is wanting something that we don't have. Now, we can say then, well, what we need to do then is to become wise enough to start wanting only the things that are easy enough to get. Wanting what we can get rather than wanting stuff that we can't get, not right now. And so we get hungry for wanting things, and then we have to go find the food, whatever it is. Maybe it's on Google, maybe it's on the dinner plate, but whatever it is, we got to go find what it is and eat it, and then we're satisfied, and we keep going through that circle. The real point then is to let's use the Dhamma language about hunger and recognizing that hunger is dukkha, wanting something that we don't have. Let's see that that's dukkha and then put a stop to it. I don't want anything right now. Isn't that marvelous? Let's not want something. Let's be satisfied with the way things are. And so when you're talking to other people, start to listen to the language that you're using, because almost always when you're talking to people, you want something. Otherwise, why talk? And if you are talking to somebody, that means that you're probably wanting something. Be aware of what it is that you actually are wanting. Are you wanting friendship? Are you wanting camaraderie? Are you wanting to prove that what you just said before is right? Are you wanting to compete? What is it that you actually want when you're in a conversation with someone? Another point that I can make on this is that often when people are talking and they get into an argument, they actually agree with each other. They're just using different words, and they want the other person to agree with them by using their language. That we're not willing to listen to someone and hear what they're actually saying in their language. We want them to use our language. And this is where most of the arguments come from. I heard that, by the way. My jaw dropped to the floor. I was about 15 at the time, having a heated argument with my dad. And my mom was listening to that, and she was saying, you guys are saying the same thing, and you're arguing heatedly with each other. I don't even remember what the argument was about, but I did remember that my mom says is that we are agreeing with each other heatedly because we're not listening to what we're saying, and we're not listening to what the other person is saying. And that's probably where most arguments are coming from. Going back to the argument about, let us say, atheism and the Christians, they're arguing about whether God exists or not, and they're actually using different definitions of the word God. What they need to do is to sit down and have a discussion so that they can come to an agreement about what the word God means, and then there's very little argument left about whether that God exists or not. But often I'll say God doesn't exist, and somebody will say God does exist. By the way, there's a Buddhist joke in there someplace, and that is the Buddhist walks by two guys on the street corner. One's an atheist and the other one's a Christian, and the atheist says, "There ain't no hell," and the Christian says, "The hell there ain't." And the Buddhist muses while he's walking by and says, "Hell, they're both in it right now." Okay, so that what that means is that you had three people there in that setting, and they all three had a different definition of the word hell. They didn't agree with each other because they weren't agreeing with the definition of the word. And so this is what I invite you to do, is start to listen to the words that you're using, understand your definition of it, and understand that somebody else may not understand your definition, and they have their own definition of the word. And this is what almost always is causing arguments. However, that's only a prelude or a beginning, so that you can then go back into and set down practicing anapanasati, which means practicing looking at what we're actually thinking, what we're actually doing with our mind, with a whole lot more clarity, so that we can begin to say, wait a minute, the thoughts that I'm having are not well defined. Let's get some definition in there. Let's understand. Let's get very specific about what we're thinking about. And then we have a choice about what we're going to do about it. An example of another word would be the word plan. That sometimes we talk about plan. Well, yeah, there's some kind of plans that are necessary. Like, in fact, it's quite possible that one or more of us are sitting here and having bodily sensations in the lower tract that indicate that we could use a trip to the bathroom. That's the plan. The plan is to go to the bathroom, but we don't execute it because we're sitting here and we want to do this. So that's one kind of plan, would be the kind of plan that we can execute immediately. And then there is the idea of then long-term goals. And then there's the idea of medium-term goals, like I've got to go to the bank. And so we can, in the process of then teaching the Dhamma, and I would say that planning is in the future, but is it in the immediate future? Is it in the intermediate future, or is it a long-term plan? Because long-term goals almost always involve suffering, involve dukkha, involving I want something that I don't have, and I've got a plan to get it. A plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and I still don't get what I want. So wisdom then would say, yeah, we can use the word plan and we can do some planning, but let's plan on getting things done immediately. Let's plan on having plans. Well, see that again, that's funny. Let's plan on having plans that we can fulfill easily, rather than having plans that are hard to fulfill and take a long time. So the example of that is everybody here, I suppose, is planning on becoming enlightened. Is that a long-term plan or is that an immediate goal? Can we become immediately enlightened? Or do we have to plan and struggle and fart around and do a noting, or maybe sitting in strong determination postures, or do all kinds of things so that we can be enlightened? Or are we going to just simply lighten up right now? Wake up, lighten up, and be enlightened right bloody now. I use the word bloody, by the way, intentionally, because it's a low-class word, especially in England, but it has a meaning to it. In fact, I use that word for the first time out of an old joke. I'll tell you the joke, and that is that the joke is that guy is praying. He wants patience. And so he says, "Oh, Lord, please give me patience. Oh, I need to be more patient. Please give me patience. I want patience right bloody now. I can't have patience to have patience. I got to have patience now." Okay, so that's a very unwholesome way of looking at it, but I think it's pretty funny. So that's another way that we can look at it is that balloon language often blows up in our face. We think that it's playful, but in fact it's quite dangerous. What we need to do is start using knife language by being very specific about what we're saying. And then we can be very specific about what we're thinking so that we can be specific enough to start having plans that we can get immediate relief from. Because if you can get what you want, then isn't that satisfying? That's what we're looking for, is satisfaction. So this is about all that I have to say about it. Let's be satisfied with what we've got. And if we have to get something, let's want something that we can get immediately. In fact, the only thing that I generally want to do is to take a deep breath, and I can do that easily. That's my most, let us say, often pressing desire, is the desire to take a breath. And then I do it, and then I'm satisfied. So this is the way we want to live our lives, is to get what we want by wanting what we can get. Amrit, do you have anything to say about this?
Yes, I have a question.
All right.
So what is your definition of meditation is?
What my definition of meditation is, I don't know. Everybody's got their own idea about meditation. That's why I don't use the word. I'm not a meditation teacher. I don't teach meditation. I teach, look at what you're doing. Is that meditation? Look at what you're doing and make a change. Is that meditation? For most people, no. For some, it's trying to dream up what you want. For others, it's look at what you're doing but don't do anything about it. For some, it's look at what you're doing and then let it run right over you. Others look at what they're doing and can't stop it. So there's many different definitions of the word meditation, and I would prefer to leave it undefined and then just not use the word. I find that really interesting because I've used the word meditation quite often in this talk and still leaving it undefined. So, Michael, do you have any last things to say?
I think this has been a wonderful, fulfilling talk for sure. It's important to choose what words we use wisely, and some words are worth avoiding altogether.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Freddie? Do you have anything to say?
No, not really, not for now. Yeah, I agree with everything Michael said. This is a great talk. Yeah.
I'll add one thing, and that is that when people are thinking, they often look up. You just looked up,
Yeah.
and that's generally where the balloons are. They're floating in the air. They're airy-fairy. All right? Let's start looking down rather than up. Why?
Yeah.
Because you've got a knife in your hand now. Let's look at what we're doing with it. Otherwise, you're going to cut your finger while you're thinking up something to say. That, in fact, this is part of the training of monks, is to look at where you're going. Keep your eyes focused on the ground in front of you, maybe as short as a couple of feet and as far away as maybe 20 feet, but not much more than that. Let's just start watching where we're going. And yet most people, when they're walking, they're looking around. So this is another point that we can make about this stuff about being specific, is start recognizing what you're doing with your eyes. What are you looking at? Because often when we're looking up, we're trying to look up something that's in the mind. Let's start using our eyes and start seeing what's in front of us rather than trying to dream up something. So become aware of when you're listening to someone. Are you looking at them? Or are you, your mind is, and the eyes are off into the wilderness someplace, thinking about what they're saying rather than actually looking at them and understanding what they're saying? That this is actually part of the practice with monks, is when you're talking to somebody, you got to look at them. Over the many conversations that I've had with people, most people will say that by and large, unless I'm making a point of it or something, my eyes are focused on the people that I'm talking to or listening to. And yet many of the people that I'm talking to, when I'm talking to them, their eyes are out there, they're over yonder, they're chasing some airy-fairy balloon out there someplace instead of actually paying attention to what's being said. So let's start having a knife and stop playing with our balloons. Let's start looking at exactly what's going on, keeping our eyes focused. Start watching what we're doing. Start watching what we're thinking. Start listening to what people are saying by watching them and looking at them rather than letting the eyes wander away. So, Drew, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, this point about words, I'm starting to appreciate it a lot more.
Can you
generally,
be specific? That, I heard that word, that. That's not, that's a balloon word, that.
About being specific about words and not using words which are likely to cause confusion. You know, when, for example, some of my friends or even I'm stressed and I try and point them in the right direction. I found it much more helpful these days to give them something small and practical. It's like, here, look at this. Do you think you can change this? Or rather than trying to go for what I think is the heart of the problem, but it's just kind of too subtle for them to notice, like something about how their ego is working or something about how they're taking it personally. And, you know, sometimes that's just too subtle. It's just that they haven't gotten quick enough or they haven't gotten alert enough to see it.
That's,
so like, well, what's the smallest thing I can point them to that will help them the most to start off with?
That's it. right there. In fact, what we've talked about today is if you're wanting to help people and they're asking you questions, the answer would be to start listening to what they're saying and start looking for themselves to see what they're doing with their eyes. In other words, become aware of what's going on. When you're talking to people, look at them. We get into the habit of looking away, I think, when we're children, because we're wanting to avoid what's being said. And so instead of looking directly at the person who is talking to you, we want to escape. We want to go someplace else. We want to look around. We don't like it where we are. Can you recognize that we turn our eyes away because we don't like what we're hearing? We don't understand it. Makes it difficult.
Indeed.
So that's how you can help people, is by pointing out these are very, very simple things. But we have to remember to look at what we're doing. So Anna, do you have any last things to say?
I just wanted to thank you for your wisdom and precision and noble speech.
That's a good word, precision. That's a really good word. I like that word, precision. Become an engineer with your language. Be precise. Be very specific. Listen carefully. Go ahead, Drew. Oh, he turned his mic off. All right, guys. Does anybody else have anything to say? Well, why don't we leave this talk? This has been a delightful talk. I really enjoy it. I really like knife language. I really like that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa would use those terms, balloon language versus knife language. So start using some knife language. Start cutting things up rather than chasing them around like a balloon. We'll see you guys later. Excellent. Okay.
Thank you. See you later.
All right. Bye-bye.